Good evening, and I want to welcome everyone. I'm super excited to be here having this conversation tonight with artist Jennifer Packer and to have the chance to talk to her with her about her terrific exhibition, The Eye is Not Satisfied with Seeing, which is on view at the Whitney right now. As many of you may know, Jennifer is a New York-based artist and painter born in Philadelphia and was included in the 2019 Whitney Biennial. She's also an artist happily in the Whitney's collection. This project was organized by Rujeko Hockley, Arnold Associate Curator. I joined as a co-curator on the project over the summer, and we both worked with Ambika Trassi, our curatorial assistant. And before I speak a little more, I just wanted to thank my colleagues Megan Hoyer and Andy Hawks for organizing this evening's event amidst the ongoing challenges. We really appreciate all of your efforts. Jennifer studied at the Tyler School of Art in Philadelphia and received an MFA from Yale in 2012. She currently lives and works in New York. She recently completed a residency at the American Academy in Rome, where she was a recipient of the Rome Prize. This exhibition, which opened in October, highlights her work of the past decade, work that combines observation, memory, and improvisation. Her intimate renderings of friends and family, along with her floral tableaus, recast these genres of portraiture and the still life, while always acknowledging her own personal grief in response to institutional violence against Black individuals in this country, seeking to expose what is and is not made visible in American culture. This exhibition was actually organized by the Serpentine Galleries in London, and we were so happy to partner with them on this project. At the Serpentine, it was organized by Melissa Blanchflower and Natalia Grabowski. And as I mentioned, Jennifer was an artist in the 2019 Whitney Biennial, which I organized with Rujeko Hockley. This is an image of a room that Jennifer's work was installed in with the artist Eric Mack. And after the biennial, Jennifer was an artist we were really interested in thinking about ways to continue working with. So having the chance to partner with the Serpentine felt especially meaningful and timely, I would have to say. I'm showing you a photograph of an exhibition Jennifer had at the Renaissance Society in Chicago a few years prior to the biennial. And it really struck me. It stayed with me for a long time. I think there was so much figurative painting, quote unquote figurative painting happening at the time and in the air. But I felt that Jennifer's work really stood out and operated in a different way. I think even in this photograph here, you get a sense of kind of the breadth of her practice, her interest in experimenting across scale around palette subject matter. And it felt really singular, and it felt in a lot of ways almost more like a conceptual painting practice. And before we start, I just want to announce that closed captioning is available for this event. If you'd like to enable the captioning feature, please click on the transcript option in the bar below. This is for our audiences tuning in virtually. And I'd like to thank Bonnie Rothermill at Sign Nexus for providing the captions. Thank you. This session is also being recorded, and the recording will be available after tonight, where you can rewatch it to your heart's content on the Whitney's YouTube channel. So I want to thank everyone who's here in person, and I also want to give Jennifer a big thanks for agreeing to do this.
Oh, yeah, let's take this off.
Yeah, you take your mask off, exactly. Okay, so I thought, Jennifer, this is an image of a work that's in the show that actually greets visitors when they come to the show. And I thought, before we kind of get into different aspects of the work, I would love for you to talk about a work like this and how you even start a work like this. Where do you begin? What are kind of the first decisions you're making in approaching a painting like this?
I think the paintings start long before they're executed. Like this is an image, like this figure comes out of like a series of French paintings, like Maurice Denis and Vuillard Bonnard. They all kind of, there's a series of drawings and paintings where they use this like a compositional structure on a like a couch. And I've been thinking a lot about this sort of figure at rest for a long time. It appears in the work a lot. I mean, I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. Like these paintings, these are very different. The ones that feel sort of more collage end up being built out of, and I think we'll talk about this, like built out of like literary sources, historical painting sources, conversations, and just sort of like thinking back on works that I've made before, actually, too. Those things sort of get interpreted or reworked over time.
One thing, this is a large-scale painting, as people can see, but one really incredible thing to me about it are the details in it, and almost the kind of different temperature that the details have in it. But will you talk a little bit, I mean, this detail of this fan here, and there are multiple fans in the painting, is so like finely rendered. You're drawn to it. Will you talk a little bit about this idea of a detail like this in a large painting like this, and why it's there and how you come to it?
Yeah, I often think that you sort of can't break something that's not fully formed. Like if I think about the Dana Schutz paintings where the folks are like eating parts of something to remake something else. I think about this like the need for a certain level of construction to do the deconstruction in the rest of the painting. So I think understanding that like I've varied relationships to realism, like something that looks real, something that feels real, something that has weight versus something that feels like it should have weight but doesn't. I'm really interested in moments like that. Like right next to the fan is a set of knives that are hanging essentially with no structure. I think about how to like produce gravity within signs in the painting.
One thing that I really loved about seeing this kind of 10-year plus span of your work in the show was to see earlier work that I hadn't seen before, and to think about how it feels related and yet different. And particularly with this work, Carolina, I was curious, and we talked about this when we were installing the show a little bit, about you seeing these things that you hadn't seen in a long time. But when you look at a work like this, are there sort of certain strategies around painting that you think, oh, those are things I kind of stayed with and built on, or here are things I maybe moved away from? You've often talked about this idea of like developing a conciseness in your painting over time. And I was interested in you talking about that vis-a-vis this earlier work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this was an interesting painting because it was a combination of a lot of different things. Like I was looking at Giotto, I was like thinking about abstraction. So you have this like moment in the corner where I was thinking about abstraction physically like pouring through a doorway. I was thinking about the range of like painterly expression. There's this guitar case that's sort of rendered like kind of in a more at the bottom, sort of more realistically, but then the guitar, there's this empty space in the center. I feel like there were a lot of devices that I realized that I had access to when I made this painting that also felt like a little too facile. Like I felt really skeptical. I was excited about this painting. It was one of the fastest paintings I'd made, but I also felt very skeptical of its beauty a little bit. But then I started to think about beauty as a device for coding, for distraction, for misinterpretation of content.
Yeah, and it also, like when I'm in the show and I see in the room with later paintings, it feels like you kind of, that this is a big basket of ideas and strategies, and over time you kind of picked certain ones out and ran with those, but that you maybe didn't need all of these or something. So this is a painting, a slightly more recent painting called Vision Impaired, that's also in the show. And to me, it's one of the most compelling examples of your willingness, and this is your word, to dissolve an image, not just abstract it maybe, but dissolve it. And whenever I'm in front of this painting, I kind of laugh about people automatically talking about you as like a figurative painter. I'm like, but wait, look at this painting. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about two things with this painting, both the decision to make it monochromatic and what that impulse is for you, but then also this decision to make it so abstracted that you have to really struggle to kind of discern anything in it. Will you talk a little bit about it? And it's obviously very different than a lot of the other works in the show.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the the monochrome renders things on an equal playing field to an extent. You sort of have to, if you want to express difference, you have to do it technically. You have to do it with like the body of the paint. The differences have to be, I think they have to be meaningful. They have to, it's like when you're drawing, you sort of, when you're drawing, things get faster. They usually get emptied out, things that are inessential to the painting. And I'd been thinking about like making paintings that had these sort of like essential parts that felt inextricable from the work, that there wasn't like dead space, that it wasn't absent of thought or decision. So the monochrome helped me to like, in some ways, be more concise, be more pointed, but also think about like radiance and connectivity within the images, like a sense of reciprocity between the figures who are deposited in these spaces. Imagining the spaces without the figures at all. Thinking about whether a figure is required to activate something.
Yeah, this painting feels like as much about the space as anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that like the ways that I draw, like anyone who draws kind of quickly, the images end up feeling coded or like I feel like I see a lot of clarity in this image when I look at it. And I know that you sort of have to pull things out. So this is also a moment of thinking about like how I want to communicate with others through clarity in an image. Like thinking, I was looking at a lot of photographers when I was an undergrad and was thinking a lot about focus and distance and obscuring the image. That you can sort of, you like get the sense of a person and then you dissolve, like their legs dissolve and then the feet appear and then there's an ear. And so you get the sense that there's someone there. Even if they're unknowable, even if they're turned away, that there's,
we don't have all the information.
Yeah, the access is not fully granted.
I was even thinking, like, even just looking at, I mean, I know this is a much earlier painting, but a painting like Carolina and then a painting like Vision Impaired, you've talked a lot about, you've said this to me a couple of times, about kind of not wanting to get in any kind of heterogeneous practice with what you're doing. That there's no like, you don't typically make paintings of a certain style. There isn't like a particular amount of kind of like detail or figurative element in a painting. You're not only making monochromatic paintings. I think, just this really is a reminder, I think, that you were almost approaching every painting like fully anew. There are certain things you're interested in, but there's a very kind of determined impulse, I think, in your work about it's not going to be the same as the other thing. It's going to be kind of very anew.
That's true. I think also about the monochrome, I'm like, I think you could look at a work and you walk away. There's a lot of color, but you don't remember any of it. You remember mood, or you remember temperature, or like climate, or attitude, light.
Yep.
I was like very interested with the Carolina painting in how quickly this content, which felt very heavy, personal, emotional, like dark, difficult. When I showed it to people, they were like, "Oh, this is beautiful. This is light. Like this is organic," and all these things that I did not feel were inherent in the content that I was thinking about. So I felt like that sort of pushed me away from thinking about like color as as an absent decorative almost.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about your drawings, and I think a really wonderful thing about this exhibition is that your drawings are in the show, obviously with your paintings, and I want you to talk a little bit about how you think about drawing, because it's certainly not some kind of like one-to-one preparatory practice for the paintings. I think you're really thinking about pushing back at any hierarchy that one medium might have over the other. So will you just talk about drawing a little bit in general and how you use it in your practice?
Yeah, it's changed a lot over time. I think I was a really terrible painter when I started. I was like in
Probably
classes
not,
with people.
but...
No, I definitely, look, all those paintings got thrown away. But I was in classes with people who were really good painters, but I felt like I was really committed to drawing. And I felt as though at a certain point that those things did not connect. People talked about drawing as sitting in the way of, like if they'd say if you're drawing like a Toulouse-Lautrec or something, you're drawing with paint. You're not actually painting. Like he's somehow not a painter. And so I felt ashamed of not being able to distance drawing from painting in that way. And so I sort of moved a little bit away from drawing and started to think about it as like this isolated, specific, special practice, which has turned into this thing where it's like the paper is actually, it's like very hard to keep and protect. So there's something that like, about that fragility that lends itself to certain kinds of image making, I think.
Yep.
Certain kinds of relationship. Like, I think the first time I showed this drawing, I looked over and somebody was like leaning on it, you know? Like they didn't think anything of it. They didn't even notice it. I mean, that feels like a problem and also an interesting way of thinking about how invisible drawings are in the midst of other works, sculpture, painting, performance. I think when I was in school, I mean, I've always made paintings of various scales, as you said, with the Renaissance Society show. And I think I have a painting that's like the exact same scale, but often I think about the ways that those images differ, like the nuances, the freedom that I can feel in painting versus drawing. That the answers, like, I don't know, the answers can be so different, actually. So, like in a drawing like this, I'm moving the arms, the body, the legs, like over and over and over again. And in the painting, you can do a little bit of that, but it tends to feel more fraught for me as a painter, to feel indecisive on a surface. And so drawing operates in that way at times. Other ways, it's like, sometimes it's just it's lighter. I'll start a drawing in the middle of working on a painting, and not as a study for the painting, but as like, sometimes the drawing ends up emptying out all that feels meaningful about the painting. And then the painting no longer feels like it needs to be finished.
That's interesting.
Which is, yeah. I don't have this hierarchical relationship necessarily.
No, but there's like these interesting interdependencies or something.
Yeah.
And you mentioned color before and palette and like the possibility for that to like, this is your word too, which I really like, to generate a climate for a painting or the sense of heat, let's say a certain amount of heat. So the drawings in our show obviously are all predominantly without any color. And will you talk a little bit about that? Like how that, what it means to make a composition where that is not one of the preoccupations of it? Is that kind of a freeing thing for you? Does it feel very different?
The thing is, I feel really sensitive. Like every piece of charcoal is like a wood that's been, transformed. And so they actually, like the charcoals have very different temperatures. So it's like working on a drawing that goes from like what feels like a very pale warm brown to a very pale green, very pale like blue.
Yep.
And so it does empty out some things, but not exactly. I mean, it depends. I mean, I think with the show as wide as this one is, with a range of approaches as wide as these are, it feels like it's on the outskirts of something. But yeah, I guess. I mean, I think one of the main questions with the drawing is about line, like the tool and line, and the ways that in the other paintings that often falls to the side more, depending on the painting. Like I was trying to get rid of the line. My hand is like so decisive, and I think I was so fixated at certain points in my life on elegance that I didn't really realize it. Like a certain kind of curve, the ways that things melt into one another. And the drawing sort of makes that clear, that there's like a flow about it, like from top to bottom almost.
Definitely.
Even as there's moments of static. And I think that doesn't actually happen in the paintings in the same way. Or for the same reason.
This painting to me feels like a kind of good contrast in a way to the drawings. This is also an older painting called Fire Next Time. And this is a work that is directly related to a James Baldwin essay that you've talked to me about a lot. So I'm curious, and I'll go back to so people can see the whole image, but I'm curious we're going to talk about this a little more. Historical painting has played such a kind of important influence on your work, but so has writing, so has literature, so has poetry. And will you talk a little bit about that interrelationship? It's easy to kind of read the essay and then look at the painting and kind of want to make certain connections. But I'm curious to hear from you, really, what is that relationship there? Is it like, are there language choices in the essay by Baldwin that feel inspirational? Is it about an overall tone, a mood, the overall message of the essay? I'm curious kind of what the actual connection is there.
Yeah, I took this amazing Baldwin class when I was in school at the time. But I also traveled to Spain, like between the right panel and the left panel. I was like laboring over this right panel, and then I went to Spain and came back and added the second one because I felt like the image needed more space. Literature has played a big role in the ways that I think about painting. Because with literature, you have really obvious limitations usually. There's no images. The images are made out of language, and you read like a Nabokov or something, and he's like so good at bringing you into the fold in a way and pushing you out when he wants you to go. And I think painting has a different kind of problem, although I think the expectation is it's supposed to do more of what writing does. I mean, I love the Baldwin essay because it's a letter to his nephew, and he's like, dude, this is hard.
Yeah, brace
like
yourself.
your father, I raised your dad, and it was hard for him, and it's going to be hard for you. And he's like naming the political climate, the social climate, in which his nephew is going to sit. I think a lot of those things are really unsayable in a work of art, like a painting. But I was interested in thinking about this call to endurance that's what he's I think passing on. He's like, it's hard. It's hard for me. It's hard for your dad. It's going to be hard for you, your countrymen, these innocents, as he calls them. They sort of can't protect you. They don't see you, etc. I think endurance and exhaustion is like a big thematic through the work over the last 10 years, for sure.
Yeah, I think you feel that in this detail here, this amazing detail of this figure. Will you? There are two other things I wanted you to talk about a little bit with this painting. I really love seeing this painting. The word solemn, too. Thinking about kind of like tone across the whole show. You've used that word. I think you've used that word about your work in general, and I think that it feels true for the show. So I'm curious for you to talk a little bit about that, because there's a real solemnness, certainly both to the Baldwin text, but also to this painting. And then the other thing, this idea of climate, the climate of a painting, and how you might achieve that through color. Because when you see this painting, when I saw this painting in person, there's like this intensity to the orange. There's two fans in the painting. I'm like immediately kind of going to this place of heat, of kind of some oppressive intensity almost. So will you talk about those two things, this idea of the solemn and this idea of maybe the color contributing to some climate within the painting?
I would love to hear how you interpret solemnity within the work. That's a hard question for some reason. The color is easier.
Well, the solemnity is interesting to me because, this didn't occur to me at first when I after having seen a lot of the work, but you sort of take movement out of the work, right? Absolutely. You talk about that.
Yeah.
And so there's something interestingly interrelated to me there about the notion of solemnity and kind of some stillness that I think is in a lot of the paintings.
Yeah.
But okay, well then we talk about the color. Don't worry about that word. We talk about the color a little bit and this idea of a climate. You've talked to me about the fans. I mean, it's amazing. There's two fans in this painting. There's another painting in the show that has three fans in it. So that's something we're coming back to. So we talk about this idea of climate a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, like back to this essay, this letter, the introduction letter to the essay, he's like describing the environment in which his nephew sits. And I think about this like color as a way of talking about something that's inextricable from the experiences of things. So color is a way of, I mean, if I think about a movie like Moonlight, it's like the color is so important to understanding like the sameness of time.
Yeah.
That like, or solemnity, right? Like that the blue has this like really strong identity across the main character's face, like in the light. I think about color and light as a condition that points, I don't know, what does it point to? A lot of different things.
Yeah.
I feel like I approach color in so many different ways. But I like the idea of a fire escape on fire too. That it was like ablaze, without a flame in it.
Yeah, and there's also like, there's no one, there's so many oranges and reds in this painting. It's kind of remarkable in person that feel like really, like on the one hand, I'm kind of having a single impression of an intensity and sensibility, but of course you start to look at the painting more closely and it's really so many different colors. Okay, so I want to switch gears a little bit if that's okay, and dig in with like historical painting. I want an important influence that has been to you. You are deeply knowledgeable about this history of painting. You're often referencing things. I'm like, I'm not sure I know what you're talking about, but I'll look it up later. But it's been very important to you, and I've also always been interested in the fact that you talk about it. Like it's an influence that you're really comfortable with, and you want to kind of engage with. So will you talk a little bit about where that started? And coincidentally, I have this Caravaggio painting up.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I should be more ashamed.
No, I didn't mean that.
No.
I appreciate your transparency about it and
people are like, what are your
dialogue about it?
What are your contemporary influences? I'm like, Caravaggio. Like, okay. Everyone is dead that I haven't. No. I think I am interested in like not taking for granted what was required to make these images. Like I think about the life, like Caravaggio's life, the way he sits as an anomaly, the way that he was forgotten and then sort of recovered in the history. Like I describe him as a true Christian. So I was giving this talk and I was talking about like that we as painters, we start with these blobs and then we turn them into people. I think we had this conversation, right? It's like, that's not a normal.
No, that's
like,
true. It's
like,
not.
What does that feel like to be like, oh, I could turn this into a person. I could make it look like you right now, or try. I don't know. I think that there's something that is like not quite investigated about that part of representation. People assume that there's a quickness, I make person. And so I'm interested in the sort of like the moments of transgression that feel more quiet. Like I'm interested in his relationship to Michelangelo. He's someone who's like, I feel like when I look at the works, I see his looking, admiring, or feeling competitive with Michelangelo. And yet the work looks nothing like a Michelangelo. None of it really does. I'm excited to think about artists who seemed deeply confined, and like those moments where there's like a crack, and he like, slithered out
of it.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this feels very queer. How does this religious image feel queer? Like, what are the points that like feel so pressed that that there's something slipping out of it? That's really interesting to me.
I've heard you talk about, in contrast to other things, you were seeing in Rome at the time of your seeing this painting, that it felt like there was, honesty might be too strong of a word, but sort of a kind of truthfulness, or kind of brutalness almost to this painting that felt different than what you were saying.
Yeah. Usually the image, if you Google it, it's cropped. A third of the painting is a window, I think. And Christ is completely in shadow, and he's nearly completely in shadow. It's just hierarchically, it's a very distinct image. It's a bar. It's a Christ in a bar scene. I don't know how many paintings I can describe that way.
Right. Well, I want to dig in with this issue of this dialogue you have with historical paintings, and then with just in painting in general, and your deep knowledge of it. And this is a more recent painting that's also in the show, A Lesson in Longing. And I remember this was a painting that was in the biennial, and Rue and I saw it kind of in early days in your studio. And I remember leaving the studio and being like, whoa, we didn't talk about this, where the color had come from when we first visited you, but I remember such a particular color. It was neither pink nor red. Already it was all over the canvas in a lot of ways. It felt like you were almost kind of leading with the color compositionally in terms of creating the work. And then when I went back to your studio subsequently, you had a postcard of this Basquiat painting up on the wall, which is actually also there's a detail of the postcard, two of the postcards, in the painting itself, which I love. So I'm interested in here and kind of what is the relationship between this painting and you using this color, but borrowing this color, let's say, from the painting. And I'm even interested in like the timing of this. Is the Basquiat, Moses and the Egyptians, a painting that you had loved for a long time, been looking at for a long time, and then it kind of seeps into a painting like this? Or you start to make this painting, you see the Basquiat, and it happens more kind of immediately? I'm kind of curious about the timing of these relationships with these historical works that are important to you.
I think this painting was supposed to be blue. I was like, I know exactly what this painting, and it's actually on top of I had another image that I had started that I was not convinced about, and abandoned. The Moses, I think I saw the Barbican show, which I had never seen the painting before. But when I looked at the larger image, I was like, oh, I'm always looking for people who are doing something that I feel like I'm doing, working in the monochrome, which feels like super rare. Like, I'll think about Lisa Yuskavage or regretfully like Thomas Eakins or something, but not a lot of painters that I see like finish a painting in the monochrome. And this was one of the paintings where I was like, oh, this is actually really exciting. And then this painting has these two distinct halves. There are these two distinct figures like split down the middle. Like the composition is split down the middle with kind of like a very pale pink band. Got me excited thinking about how to like imagine these two, like the painting as two tablets situated next to one another with distinct moments of language and coding. Often the paintings, I think I end up believing that I know how to get to the end of a painting. So I will start it in a way that I think I learned something about color through. And then that color is so interesting to me that I don't abandon it.
Interesting. This was another painting that you had talked about in relation to this painting. And this was one of those instances when I was like, really? That's amazing. But I like it surprised me, and that there was this relationship to the Seurat painting. There is almost a kind of, even though there's many colors in the painting, it has a kind of monochromatic vibe to it. But will you talk here about maybe more structurally what the kind of relationship or influence might have been?
Yeah, I think there was a show called Circus or Seurat Circus or something at the Met. And I feel like it rendered really clearly like paintings, like a lot of paintings, objective, which is to present something. Whether it feels natural or unnatural, who knows? But like someone like Magritte brings up the question of like how difficult it is to like turn away from the stage. Like that the painting is this like never-ending performance of something, of information, of knowledge. Everything is facing forward, whether it's figurative, whether it's Guston, whether it's Rothko, like those things, it's like materials forward, figure forward, abstraction forward, everything surface. And I saw the show and I was like very excited by a literal kind of feeling presentation of painting. I was like, oh yeah, the circus makes sense. There's a stage and then the people are on it. Veronese is a good example of someone who's like presenting everyone on a stage essentially. So I think I was more excited about that idea, that through line, to think about like if I anticipate the stage, which is the way people talk about figurative painting. I mean, since I was in school and before school, that figurative painting is a place for people to think about access. I could see myself in that painting, which is like, that's psychotic, but
Right.
that you could kind of place yourself within a painting. Then I could start to think about like how accessible the stage is through color, through composition. Is there even room for you?
Yeah.
And do you want to be in that painting? Which is something that I think Carrie James Marshall also, there's a question that comes to me when I look at that work too. Do I want to be in that painting? Do I belong in that painting?
So I want to talk a little bit about the floral tableaus, the floral still lifes you've made, which you told me a great story once that when you first started making these, people would come into your studio, and these paintings might have been in your studio, and then there would be maybe portraits or other paintings, and people would kind of look over at these and be like, oh, well, I'm going to head over here towards the portraits because I don't quite know what to make of that. And that always struck me because I think there's a boldness to kind of engaging with this genre of painting in 2015 or 2022, whatever it is. So will you talk a little bit about like starting making these paintings and kind of what got you interested in it and why you started making them?
Yeah, I think the more time I spend looking, like poring over journals and things, the earlier I see impulses. Like I've always been interested in observation as like a dedicated practice, and painting as a way of transmitting like essential or emotional information. So like Morandi is a very big influence for me. It's like he is able to articulate like the intensity of relationships, like the meaningfulness of the proximity of two bodies through like a painting of a bottle, two bottles, a can, with color grays. So that excited me that there could be like profundity in an observational practice like that with something that felt so low. Like you look at the photos of the works or even his early works, and it just seems there's like something that's happened over time that feels really transformative. So these paintings like came out, I used to call them a palette cleanser, but that came back to bite me a little bit.
Sorry.
But I'm like, whatever, I can live through that. I don't have to, everything doesn't have to be an articulation of some like deep cultural meaning necessarily. But I think a painter's work happens like sometimes on the canvas. So I did have this relationship, this hierarchical relationship to the figurative paintings that weren't portraits. I thought they were the most important works in the practice. And then I would turn to these bouquets and I was like, well, Morandi did it, Fontaine-Latour did it, Manet did it, Degas did it. And as all these people came in my studio and they kind of shit on it, I was also like, but there's this whole genre. All these French painters, all these Dutch painters, these Flemish painters, they all turned their eyes toward something that feels so insignificant to a certain degree, and made meaning out of it. And so I think over time that like relationship has changed. So they've always been based on observation. They've never been something where I was just like, make up a flower, because you kind of know what that looks like. Fontaine-Latour makes up a lot of flowers. He's really good, but you're like, that's not real, my guy. Like that's,
Can I ask you one thing? I'm just going to show two examples quickly of works, two incredible floral still lifes that you made. Now, one thing that's always jumped out at me versus the examples by Manet and Fontaine-Latour, maybe in general, the historical examples that you're talking about, is there's no vessel in your paintings, and there's sort of no definition of the space behind the floral arrangement. There's no table. It's not a still life with other objects. The flowers almost seem to be floating in space. Now, this painting, Say Her Name, was specifically about the death of Sandra Bland and kind of honoring her life. But will you say something about, and for me, I think I always read the lack of a vessel to signal that it's not really just a still life. It's about a kind of idea, and I'm almost putting it in a more abstracted space and tightly framing it because I want to cue that it is about an idea, a feeling, something, an idea that's maybe more abstract than simply the objects themselves. But will you talk a little bit about kind of the space the arrangements live in and maybe how they do or don't relate to the kind of bigger idea around a painting like this, let's say?
Yeah, I think the paintings, like earlier ones, they do have vessels. They are sitting there, like, I wanted to ground them. But Matisse is like a good example of a painter who does away with what is unnecessary. He's just like, yeah, it's just floating there. You know, are you good?
Yeah.
I think this sort of feeling, like things often lose power when you start to name them, like literally, you know, like things lose their heat, like
Their possibility.
Yeah,
of
I like the
something.
idea of images that don't belong in a space,
Yeah.
or you know, I think I'm like, it's weird because I feel very interested. Like what I was saying earlier is like I'm interested in building things so I can break them apart, and the bouquets are an example of that, where it's like I'm observing like every single thing that's painted. I was looking at something specifically, observing. Some of them are composites, but also thinking about like how they start to lose something when they become overwrought or.
No, there's like a power almost, not that they're loose, but the kind of freeness of the painting gives them a lot of their power to me somehow, and that they're not contained in a vessel, or these more recent ones. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea around the politics of representation, how this first became important to you as an idea, and vis-a-vis the work you would go on to make. And I know this is a really important painting for you, I think, vis-a-vis some of these questions.
Wait, ask that again?
I want you to talk a little bit about kind of as you were looking at art and kind of who you saw represented in the history of art and who you saw missing, you know, the kind of lack of Black figures and Black female figures in particular. I feel like that this was a painting actually that you put in the biennial catalog as kind of an important inspirational painting. So I wanted to come back to it and to this issue of representation, what you were seeing and kind of what that led you to go on to make.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a Black person, I'm pretty well primed to not expect my image, like my likeness, as a young person to appear everywhere. So, and as a painter, I'm like looking at a lot of different things. So when I was younger, I was so distracted by material that I was like, what are people doing on the surface? I could walk up to a painting and not even like remember precisely what was in the image. I was like so invested in the surface. My practice is not one where it's like a corrective gesture. I'm not trying to like fill in historical gaps. I'm not trying to repair the canon through representation. When I talk about going to the Met, the American Wing, going to the Tate, like going to various collections, I'm just like, I feel an absence. Like I feel certain levels of performativity around class, around whiteness, around posture, around, I can't look at a sailboat painting without thinking about like transatlantic travel, you know? Like I can't look at a Turner without thinking about that. Although no one talks about that as a part of that, you know, part of the life of that work to a certain degree. But I think that show that was at Columbia that was curated, it was like, I forget what it was called. You know what I'm talking about? I went to the D'Orsay. I mean, this is it's like an interesting painting to think. It's interesting to think about a Black woman as a curator of an aesthetic within an image, even though that hand is painted like crazy. You know, I like that as a precedent, imagistically.
And I want to have you talk quickly about your portrait practice, let's say, and also your practice of making portraits of so many people that you know that are close to you. Here's some examples, and we can just land on this terrific painting, The Body is Memory, of the artist Eric Mack. And, you know, two things I'm hoping you'll talk a little bit about. You know, both how you honor, let's say, the subject of your paintings, but also how you protect the subject of your paintings, how you hold back certain information. There's an amazing way in a painting like this that there's an intimacy conveyed, and yet you're kind of holding certain things back. So I'm interested in having you talk about that. And then also, what is it meant to paint like so many artists in your community that you're friends with, that you went to school with? I mean, do you think about the kind of gesture of making a record of this community, of this moment?
I think of the practice as like a proof of life. You know, I'm not a documentarian in that way. I'm not like, look, this is Guston and Pollock and de Kooning. It's not like that. It's really like, these are people that are beloved to me, who sit with me, who spend time with me. And it's as much about me trying to make meaning out of that time as it is about like articulating their, like, some substantive image of them. Protecting kind of goes back to your last question about the collections. If I look through those collections, I see typically women aren't well protected, you know. Black folks aren't well protected. There are a lot of ways that when a painter does what they want to do, it has not like traveled through time well. So I see the decadence in the Orientalist room at the Met. Like, I'm like, you really loved the look of all of these people, the beauty, the fabrics, the scents, the architecture, but that is like rendered an image that feels so cold to me, so inhuman.
Yeah.
And then my practice is like thinking about ways to skirt around, or like maybe pass through those things, to like understand how my enjoyment or pleasure produces a problematic picture.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about kind of wanting to, or being interested in this idea of interiority. And I think, you know, for reasons that I can't even explain, I feel that with this painting, that it's, and you said this before many times, it's not about a likeness of Eric, it's about, you know, kind of getting at some interiority, some feeling instead. And before we go to questions, will you talk a little bit about the use of the monochrome here? If I'm remembering correctly, you once said something to me, you've painted Eric many times, maybe more than anyone. And, you know, you said, well, anytime I've made a painting of him, he's sitting there, there's the moment I'm making the painting, but then there are also all of kind of my memories, my experiences, conversations with him that come to bear on a single image. And that in using a monochrome, or at least he's kind of in a monochrome, is almost a way of conceptually unifying all of those different things that like come to bear on how I make him. Will you talk about that a little bit? I love that idea.
That's great. I think
you said that.
I said that. Okay. I mean, I guess in that regard, it wouldn't be that different from the ways that I've talked about the monochrome in the other paintings.
Yeah.
In relationship to climate, and in relationship to like the integration of this person into the space, that there's like an inextricable quality to those two parts, person, place, emotion, architecture. The interiority thing and the protection thing that you were talking about is like also so tied to the ways that people want to put language to representations of Black and brown people. I feel like I have to leave some space for humility in the description, in the things that I don't know.
Yeah, you'll use the word unknowable a lot. You said that to me.
Yeah. I think people talk about work when it pertains to Black folks or POCs, that there's some knowable quality, that it's like there's a didactic quality to what the work is doing, and I'm not trying to explain to you who Eric is. That's not what I don't think that that's like, painting's not great at that.
Yeah. Right.
It's not good at it.
There are other mechanisms.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Is it okay if we take a few questions now?
For sure.
All right. So Patty asks, what are your thoughts about the audience? Thinking about a painting as a sort of dialogue between the artist and the viewer, how do you feel about what your viewers see and feel about your work? Or does that not matter to you?
There's like there's so many different types of audiences that, like I talked about coding. Like I'm interested in that Carolina painting. While everyone was saying one thing, one person, another student came to my studio and was like, this is the saddest painting I've seen. I know what that is, I know what that is, I know what that is. And I was like, yes. Okay, there are multiple points of approach, and we understand that when we go to a museum. As I'm saying, I can go through the American wing, I can like love some paintings and also have some problems with it. I don't see myself as the ideal audience for George Washington crossing the Delaware. But I could still possibly appreciate something somewhere about it. I think that inherent in image making and the individuality of a person, it's like the way that you experience something, it's hard to anticipate. So I try not to like, I'm interested in making work for people who love, or making work that, isn't the right word exactly, but I feel like I'm a keen observer of things that I think matter. And I want to make work that rewards people for looking. And usually that looking is earned over time. So I think about the audience a lot in that way, that I'm like, okay, well, how do you relate to observation? I don't know. That's a tough question because it always like hits that edge of like thinking about pandering or accessibility or.
The question sort of reminds me of something. It's a little different, but it reminds me of something you talk about your own vulnerability in making paintings, making portraits in particular. You know, what does it mean to be, I mean, even just thinking about this painting of Eric, like it's tricky to continually paint people on some very basic level. And, is it going to feel disappointing? Is it going to be maybe both not what you aspire for it to be or that the sitter might imagine? And I like kind of took that for granted, but hearing you talk about that it really puts you in a vulnerable place. And even thinking about you wanting at that moment to have the floral still lifes almost be like a palate cleanser or maybe a break from that intensity of having that vulnerability, that pressure of making portrait paintings was interesting to me.
And also the flowers are like a good example of something that I thought was really, I didn't think was meaningless, but I thought I could be more physically direct. Like I felt like I could get everything I wanted to do technically in those paintings that I would not have the courage to do in the other paintings, that it would feel like egregious or ridiculous. The flowers like lend themselves to all different kinds of approaches. It's
right.
Like, oh, this is so beautiful. Oh, this is like weeping. Oh, this is like heavy. And
it's like a different platform.
Yeah,
almost.
and I can't really anticipate the audience that appreciates that.
Okay. So Jennifer asks, thinking about your comment that you need to build something out in order to break it down regarding the detailed elements, let's say, in Blessed Are Those Who Mourn. Could you talk about whether that same philosophy has influenced your study as a portrait artist and the way you're able to depict the human condition?
Yes. Yeah, I think we take for granted that a painter who can take a bunch of, like, if you look at Giacometti, they seem like very unkind images. You look at an Otto Dix, you know that he's someone who is like spinning something into like a dirty, dark light. Caravaggio is like turning, you see the rest of Italian painters and you're like, wow, there's light and slush and it's gorgeous and there's no blood anywhere. And Caravaggio's like dirt, 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 dirt. Like that's an active choice to like give and take away. And whether the artist understands that or not, who knows, right? But like, yeah, I think about that responsibility of like naming what I can see and being generous about that naming and being generous about like, I don't know, there's so many parts of it. And obviously I'm still like, the questions are rich and full and I don't have answers for them that that will last me to the end of the year necessarily. I don't know, that's a good question.
Maybe we have time for one last question, which is maybe a kind of very fundamental thing that we could have talked about earlier. Do you think about your depictions of people as portraits? And how do you think about your relationship to portraiture as like a whole genre, let's say? Like,
Yeah. That hasn't mattered. That hasn't mattered very much. I think people categorize them because they feel differently. You know, like you're like, oh, there's a person, that's a portrait. But then, like, A Lesson in Longing, I'm not naming those people for anyone. So it's like, but this is also not named. This is like taken from a Claudia Rankine text.
And that's a distinction. Some of these paintings are named for the sitter, others not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if the designations are that important. I mean, I could say her name. I couldn't actually. I'm sorry, I could not call it a portrait, but I don't see those designations as being very important, except when you're trying to nail down meaning around like making images of people. And yeah.
Yeah, and I think
I just lean into it, I think, with those descriptions.
Well, and I think a work like this is a good example that this painting is a lot of different things than simply a portrait. I mean, as you said, the title alone kind of cues you to that in an amazing way.
But I also think that like portraiture hierarchically is like the person takes up the greatest amount of real estate in an image.
Yeah.
And there isn't this like, even if you think of someone like Hans Holbein, the ambassadors, they're just in between these two brothers is all this stuff. And even a skull and you know, like I think the ways that we evaluate would I call it a portrait? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, on a painting like this, even kind of comes around to a lot of the things you're saying. You know, on the one hand, there is sort of a portrait in this painting, but in terms of kind of what you've given real estate to, space to, you're really kind of pushing at the possibility of someone's in a simple way saying, oh, this is a portrait painting.
Yeah. Although I have always liked the designation of landscape to describe the way that I think about space in all of the paintings.
Interesting.
Actually.
Okay, well, on that note, Jennifer, I'm just going to say a big thank you for doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I just want to say thank you for doing this tonight. Thank you for working on this show with the Whitney, with Rue and I, with helping to install the show in such a meaningful way. And also thank you for being a part of the biennial. I feel grateful that we've had this kind of long dialogue and these different stops along the way. So thanks for all of your time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.